right, well, we got Dan on the line.
And I started thinking, I probably shouldn't have shared those pictures.
All right, guys, we got Don Higgins on.
Anything that's got to do with chasing big deer, I've got my hands in it somehow. So,
well, my name's John Eberhart. The first one that comes to mind was early in my career.
I'm Scott Buckley from Iowa. I had jumped him in the summer too. He jumped up in that swamp grass down in the bottom lake.
And that's what I'm doing. I'm chasing it. There ain't nothing stopping me.
Justin Hollandsworth. I'm with Whitetail Addictions and Lone Wolf Custom Gear.
So what are we talking about tonight?
We're talking about the one that got away.
To talk about a deer that you didn't get it done on for some reason. So go ahead and get into the story of the one that got away. Well, we had you on the podcast, a little different than you're normally coming on, to talk about a deer that you didn't get it done on for some reason. So go ahead and get into the story of the one that got away.
We could get into probably 20 of these, but we'll just talk about one. And probably the one that, I don't know, probably the one that's still like, just to think about it, just kind of that deer just, I had that deer dead so many times, it's not funny. So this was when we first learned about the deer, he was a 3-year-old, and as a 3-year-old, he was in the 150s, just a big, clean, typical 10. And we picked up a shed from that deer that year, and he just looked like, he just had the makings, he had the big long fours, and just a big, huge 10-point frame, and didn't seem like he was going to get junk. He didn't seem like he was going to get a bunch of junk on him either. The following year, I killed a buck early. I killed a buck here in the first week of season, and I got out there and I started getting pictures on a cell cam of this deer pretty consistently on a scrape. And I got there late and I couldn't go in the first evening. And I slid in, got set up, and the deer, it was about probably 8:30. I had 2 small bucks come in. It's the only 2 deer I've seen all morning. And this is during late October. And they were down below me sparring, and they kind of pushed off to my right and kind of behind me. And I would look over from time to time and just listening to those 2 spar. And about the 3rd or 4th time that I turned around and looked over there, he's standing there. And he's standing at 25 yards. And I'm like, oh shit, I got to get this bow in my hand. And then I got to turn, and I did not have a shooting lane in that spot over there, but I had a mock scrape that was set up in there. And that's where I was getting pictures of him. And that deer, he came through at 25 yards, and I could not throw as much as I wanted to. There was nowhere I could squeeze a shot off. And then I thought, I was trying to stay patient in the moment too. So the deer hooked around, went back to his bed, didn't go to that scrape, hunted that deer, saw that deer one other time while I was there for those 4 or 5 days. Came back, hunted him hard again, couldn't get on him. Then during late season, I went out there, and the deer was still on the property, and he made it through the gun seasons and everything else. And I went out there, and this would have been my 3rd trip. And I get out there, the deer's he's running with 4 other bucks now during late season. And every time I set up on the deer, he would pop out on the other end. And I'm like, how am I going to get to this deer? And the access, and the other problem was the access was so limited, and there was snow on the ground too now. and I had to cross big open fields to get there. So this is a funny story that you guys would probably get a kick out of. So I'm in a hotel room and wake up, and this would have been 2018. And you guys is in Illinois, you guys get just absolutely dumped on with a big snowstorm in late season. And I mean a ton of snow. Well, I had my electric bike, and there was like, okay, there's no way I can ride this thing around anymore. This thing's done for on this trip. And I only had that evening left. And I was on the phone with Heath, and I told him, I was like, I got to get all the way back there. But my concern is that they're going to see me going across that field. And him and I come up with this, I don't even know where this came from, but we come up with this idea that I'm going to take the bed sheets from the hotel, and I'm going to drape these bed sheets over me because I'm walking across this big wide open field, as white as can be, just it's got a foot of snow.
Look like a ghost going in there, bro.
Well, I told him, I was like, I'm either looking, people are going to think either I look like a ghost or a Ku Klux Klan member, and this is not going to be good. So I said, we got to be careful with this because that's the last thing I want. So I hooked around that night because I knew, because it just, to me, the deer was coming out one side or the other of that field because he was seeing me somewhere. That's literally what I did. I literally cut the eyes out of that damn thing. No exaggeration.
Whatever it takes, man.
Walked all the way across that field, and I'm like, okay, I had a couple preset stands. One of them was on a fence row on this field, and the other one was like back in the woods. And I thought that he was bedding more back towards the woods, and I felt like I needed to get close to him. But then there was something that kept telling me too, like, nah, just go hunt the safe spot, go hunt I go in deep, go into that, stand into the woods. Just as I'm entering or about to enter the woods, he walks by a cell cam that's on that fence row over there where I was going to go. And he's walking away from me. So I look at that, and I'm like, and it's a long walk through a bunch of deep snow to get back there. I was a sweaty mess by the time I got back there. So I get in the stand, I'm completely discouraged. It's like, my last evening. So as the night goes on, I see a ton of deer. I had deer on me all night. I had these 6 does, and they were just kind of hanging around me all night and everything else. And then towards the end of the evening, I had a small buck come in to my left, and I'm left-handed. So he comes in on my bad side, even if it was a big deer. And then about 150-inch deer that we called Loppy, he's got this great big broken ear. He comes in, and I'm like, man, I should shoot that deer because he's an older buck. And then it just kind of like dawns on me. I was like, man, we called this deer High Rise, the one I was trying to kill. I'm like, that's that buck. High Rise been hanging around with that buck this whole late season. And I just slowly turned and looked over my shoulder, and he's standing back there at 20 yards on my bad side. And I got 6 does out in front of me here. I got those 2 bucks down below me here. And I'm like, how am I going to get my bow hooked up, stand up, because I'm going to have to stand up to turn around to shoot. Or do I just let this happen? That deer came down the hill. And anyways, finally just got to the point I was like, I got to make a move. I got to do something. So I drew and stood all in one motion and got cracked by that doe. and everything blew out of there. He didn't know why they left, and they left out of there, and I never got a crack at him the rest of the season because that was right at the tail end of the season. And I remember sitting there thinking, I was like, man, I should just call off work a couple more days. I should just burn up a couple more vacation days and get this deer killed. But I'd already made 3 trips out trying to kill that deer all season. And then my I guess my own guilt too of like, you know, being away from work, more importantly, being away from, you know, my wife and son. And I'm like, the guilt starts to, I was like, just, you've made 3 trips. Now you're just being selfish. Just give it up. So I drove home. So that March, we go out there, we pick up one side to him. So I'm like, okay, he's back. He's going to be back in there again and have a chance to hunt him. So I didn't get a chance to get back out there till it was the last week of October. And when I got back out there, he was kind of MIA off the farm. I got pictures of him in the early season, but that was kind of it. I went in, hunted a big open cut cornfield, and I could see a long ways from this point. All I wanted to do, I figured if I could just lay eyes on him, then I could make a move. You know, then I could start to play the game and make my moves accordingly to what he was doing. I hunted that spot in an evening, left all my stuff in that tree, and hunted to a stand that we have in a timber up on this ridge. So I get up there, hunted for like, I don't know, till like probably noon or so. Maybe it was closer to 1. And I had a cell cam on a small little clover plot, and he walked across that clover plot at 1:30. I pulled my phone out at one point, and I'm like, oh God, he's all the way over there. I'm like, he's back in here, but he's all the way over there. So I literally, it'd probably been funny to watch how fast I was going down that tree to get back to my bike, to get back over to that other side. Cause I'm like, I'm just going to go over there and try to cut him off tonight. Cause he's going to come back out. Cause I thought he was in this hedge thicket, and I thought he was going to come back out. Hunted him, didn't see him that night. A few days later, I went in and I went in and just scouted this whole spot out. I'm like, I'm just going to go in here and I'm just going to burn it up and just put some boots on the ground. And I cut a big track. And that deer, he kind of had a real recognizable track, the kind of the way that it was shaped. I'm like, man, that's got to be him. He's got to be coming out over here. And there was a fence gap opening coming off the neighbors on the backside of this place. And with the wind, the way that it was for that evening, I'm like, you know what? I'd like to be over here on this other side. And this is part of a mistake that I made on this deer. Instead of like, you know, not following my gut, not following that hunch, which I think is just so important. It's our natural instinct as a hunter to have that. And when you don't follow it 9 times out of 10, I believe that you probably cost yourself a deer. And 100% that cost me that deer that night. The tree that I would have been on, instead of going and hunting right off that trail where that deer would have came out at 10 yards, I hunted back hoping he would come out, then work his way out, because I was too worried about what the wind was doing. And I was too worried about what the other deer might and how that might affect them and then blow my opportunities. You got to take gambles to kill big deer. And I didn't that night. And the tree that I knew I shouldn't have been in, he came right out at 10 yards under it. He came out, worked a scrape on the opposite end of the field. And when I say opposite end of the field, he's only 80 yards when he comes out. So it wasn't like I was 200 yards from the deer or something like that. I mean, it's a small field. And he goes down and he works some scrapes. He worked, and then he worked every doe in that field that night. And we're talking about 180-inch typical. Just a stud. I mean, just clean and the footage, I'll send you guys some video clips of this. And it just an awesome deer. He worked those does on every field edge and corner of that field except the corner I was setting it. At one point, he was pushing does down to me, and one of the does double backed, and he followed her. So they cleared out of there, went in, hunted the deer again that night or that morning, left everything in the tree because I still had the same wind. Because I'm real good about that. I'll leave everything, my bow, everything, and just I think it makes it so easy just for that setup in the morning. Didn't seem that night. I set up on the other end of the field because the wind switched. And this was the thing that I was doing. I was so worried about hunting like this perfect wind, even though I know better at times. I still revert back to these idiotic things that some of us do at times. And instead of going over and taking the gamble and hunting a kind of, I wouldn't say a bad wind, but something that you have a much better chance of getting cracked on, I didn't. So I played it safe. He comes out again. I even thought about setting up over there. Comes out on a doe. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Now he's gonna come out over there and come out last light. And she fed and he just followed her around like a puppy. So they go all the way down into this point and they go in at last light. I come back the next morning, and in the morning I was worried that they were going to be in that field. So I slid in on the back side of this fence row and came up, got set up that morning, and there was a big snowstorm blowing in, and it was raining that morning when I got in there. And then it changed over to ice, and then later turned over to sleet. And there was like 25 and 35 mile an hour winds. I mean, it was rocking up there. There was 2 small bucks that came out, and they started to go down into that little cut where they went in earlier. And I thought they're going to go down there and bump those 2. Sure shit. Here comes this doe flying out of there. And I'm like, man, I wonder if that's that doe. And about that time, the 2 small bucks come out chasing her, and he comes following. And I mean, it sounded like trees crashing in there. I mean, they were just going nuts, chasing her all over. And it got quiet for about 10 minutes. And over to my right-hand side, here they come. At Mach 1, here they come. And I'm like, oh shit. And I knew as soon as she popped out, I just drew my bow because I already had my bow in my hand. I just drew my bow because I'm like, I know they're coming. And I could not stop. They passed by me at 15 yards. I could not stop that deer for nothing. So now we're up to 3 encounters with that deer inside of 25 yards. I can't get him killed. I mean, it's just like the deer he just had my number. Goes back in. They're crashing all over. I sat there probably way longer than I should have because that tree was completely ice, and trying to get down it. I remember trying to get down it, and I was like, I'm going to take my safety harness, and like as I go down, like making sure like I'm tied off to something because it was a stand that we had in there for a long time. And it was the old lone wolf sticks that were kind of they're real tight up against a tree with the short little pegs. And man, I was worried about falling out of that thing coming out of there that night and, or that morning. And I went back in and I'm like, okay, now I'm going to go for broke because I'm running out of time. And I went down in there and I'm like, yeah, I know they're down in here somewhere. I'm going to go as far as I think I can go without taking too much of a gamble. And I got in there so far and I bumped them. I bumped him and that doe. They were laying right next to the creek. I made that turn. They were laying like right on like a little island that jogged out on the creek right there. It was an odd spot for them and they just bailed out of there. And I remember like, God, you gotta be kidding me, man. So I think, back about, hunting that deer and just all the things that I did. And I was excited. Even we went back out there in March and we picked up both sides of that deer and he was low 180s. And I'm like, yes, he's going to be back in here. This is going to be awesome. The deer disappeared. I've never seen a deer since. So we found the sheds that year and I thought, here we go. We're going to be right back in the game with this deer. And, now I'm thinking, gosh, if he just puts on 10 inches, I mean, he could be 190 inch typical. I mean, they're a 200 inch typical, world-class kind of deer. And I was so fired up to hunt that deer. And he literally fell off the face of the earth. He lived through that. He made it through that season for us to be able to pick up his sheds. And then he was coming. I mean, and still to this day, he's never showed back up. So I don't know what happened to that deer, but to me, there's a deer that, I mean, that got away that, man, that one hurt. That one, I had so much fun playing the game with that deer. I mean, to me, that was some of the most fun that I've ever had hunting a deer. And I never got the deer. I mean, that to me, like, and I guess if the one thing you can learn, or the one thing that I learned anyways, is, we're all natural born killers. We're all hunters. I mean, we have this instinct about us. And I think the biggest thing that sometimes is when you get a gut feeling, you need to act on it. And don't talk yourself out of something. If you think that's the tree, but I don't want to do that because that's not, the safe route. If I go back over here, then at least that way I won't booger him. If he comes out, does this or that. If your gut feeling is to get into that one tree right there, which I had that feeling numerous times on that deer, I should have acted on it instead of trying to play the safe route. Because that's why he beat me.
Got to take risks to kill big deer. That's what you said, towards the end of the beginning of the episode there. I believe that, man. But I mean, that many encounters, that many close, to have them draw dead to rights, 15 yards and him not stop. And then the damn does are always getting us, man. Mm-hmm. They're always getting us on, you're drawing. I've had that happen where a doe, you got him right there, the buck's dead, and then luckily mine, the doe spooked and he ran out and I was still able to get a shot on him. But it's really hard to watch 6 different deer at the same time when you're trying to shoot one of them. So I had a deer that I called Homeboy, did the same thing. I had does real close and I drew on him and she spooked and he spooked and then he ran out, but he didn't want to lose his doe. So the doe ran the opposite direction and he was wanting to come that way. So he just stood out there quartered away and I was able to get one in him, but I had to hold my bow for like a minute. The longest, people say a minute, but you hold your bow for a minute, what it feels like. You're like, holy
a minute's a long time holding the bow.
Dude, it was on my knee down. I wasn't even on the peep. I'm just holding out the whole time. I'm like, well, this is over. What was funny was there was a really nice 8-pointer right here that didn't do anything, was still browsing. So I was like, I could kill this 8-pointer, but I really want to kill this one over here. So I was like, if he spooks, I'm going to let my bow down. Then I'm going to kill this one. That was my game plan. So I had a backup. I had the backup going on. But yeah, sounds like, I mean, there's really nothing you can really do it. And I hate when a deer just ghosts us. Like, got all this history with us, you're putting the pieces together, and then like we had a buck we called TT, and just an absolute beautiful deer. And he was there, we hunted him, then he was there the next year, and then we seen one buck that got hit by a car that had a head cut off, and we made a joke that it was him, and then now he's gone. And you're like, well, was that him? Did someone kill him?
Oh,
yeah. And that was like a 170 class, high 165 class deer. The best velvet pictures we've ever had of a deer, that deer, come through back hard horn, you know, and you're just like, you get emotionally attached to these deer. You want to figure them out. That's the beauty of hunting. When you get to the stage of after you've killed a couple, you want to like physically beat that deer. And that's why I got so much respect for you. I feel like in the rut, yeah, you beat them. If you could beat them in the first 15 days of season, you beat that sucker. Like, that is the putting the pieces together. You legitimately beat that thing. And then after that, late season, I still feel like there's a draw for food that they don't have early season. They have to get up earlier when it's cold. So you still beat the deer, but it's not like that first 15 days where he doesn't have to move. He doesn't have to do anything. You just literally completely plucked him out. You know, you didn't just go out there and he came by or he was going to food or whatever. So
that's where you're just putting all the odds in your favor. You're stacking everything in your favor for the one hunt. And you're just waiting to seize that moment. And I think that takes time. I think it takes experience. I think it takes patience as you get older, to, learn to, say, yeah, I want to go in there and hunt that deer, and just be so eager to get in there. But, that's where you just know that I'm going to set back. I'm going to wait for this to develop even more, and to the point where it's like, okay, now I'm going to go in and I got the best chance I possibly can to kill that animal, because I can honestly say that most of the time during the early season, and I kind of joke, it's kind of more of a joke. I mean, I'm not serious, but then again, in my mind, I'm like, I'm serious. I am killing this deer tonight. Yeah. This is happening.
You're willing it to happen. Yeah.
And I think just having that confidence in your setup and how you're strategically planning that whole situation. And when you can be patient enough to set back and wait for some things to align, to me, there's nothing sweeter. I love, knocking one down, early in the season. I will say though, sometimes I'm like, season goes along and then all of a sudden some other big deer show up. God dang, wish I had another tag.
Wish I had a tag. Yeah.
Now I got a 12-year-old
here, luckily. So
I got a 12-year-old son now. So I'm like, okay, well, and he shot his first one last year. And I was like, I took him over to a farm last year and we had a couple pretty good deer over there. And he had never shot a deer period before. And he had a doe come in, a couple does come in at first. And I said, dude, you can shoot one if you want, he's like, no, I want to wait on a buck. I was like, okay. So then two small bucks started working their way across the field that night. And I didn't know what he's going to do. I was like, are you going to shoot one? You want to shoot one of these bucks? And because the way he was talking earlier and there, I was like, I think he wanted to hold out. Like, I was like, man, I hope I didn't ruin him. Like, because he just sees, dad shooting big deer. And I didn't want him to, I wanted him to shoot a doe or just a dink or something like that. And once that deer got in there, it was just a little 4-point. And he was like, no, I'm shooting him. I was like, okay, cool.
Oh yeah.
He shoots that deer. And as soon as he shoots that deer, I turn and I look down the fence row at 60 yards, and there's a 150-inch 8 standing there.
Oh God.
And I said, Mason, look at this big buck. And he's like, oh, Dad, we should have waited. And I'm like, nah, you shouldn't have waited. You shot the right deer. But
all right, man. Well, we'll wrap it up here. I appreciate you coming on for 2 episodes and spending a couple hours with us here. I know that the listeners can take some good value from this. You know, go with your gut. That's a super solid message, and I guarantee you that. What I was thinking about just stuff with us where we actually went with our gut, and it's like, yep. And then I was thinking about the time I messed up on chaos. I was like, I need to go one stand deeper. Didn't go on the mobile cam while I'm out there hunting, going right past that stand. You're like, damn it. You know, like you said, you have some kind of instinct where you have an idea, just like when we were going to go in on the ground last year. The gut feeling was, man, we need to go back in there. We never went. You know, it could have been a game changer to go in there, and maybe we would have picked up some sign on the way in, or maybe we would have, you know, seen the deer or seen a deer make a move. So that's a great lesson. Yeah. You have to take chances to kill big deer. And if you don't, you're not going to fill as many tags as you're going to eat. I mean, it's just, I just truly believe that if, you know, you got to take some gambles, and I'm still, and I think all of us kind of do this even now. Like, there's still times where I revert back into those old habits at times. And then I'm like, quit it, you know, like, quit doing that. Why you like, this is everything, you know, these are the things that you don't do, and the things that that I'm talking to you guys about, you know, and I'll still revert back to that stuff sometimes, but take some risk and follow your gut. And I think you'll definitely get a lot more cracks at big deer for sure. All right. Well, that's the perfect way to end it, man. We appreciate you coming on.